Well, if there's one thing that's true in the flight sim community, it's that we love our hardware. So let's take a look at some. A big thank you to WinWing for sending me the Orion 2 throttle base as well as the F-15E and EX handles for the Orion. We're going to kind of take a look at this in two different ways. We're going to look at the Orion 2 base, and then we're going to look at the F-15E handles. I've got the EXs installed, and then I've got the E's here on the side. So the first thing I want to talk about is the actual putting it together. It came in 3 different boxes. No surprises in putting it together necessarily. It didn't come with a manual. There's not a manual available online as of the time of this video. Putting it together really wasn't a big challenge. There was a little hunting and pecking trying to figure out which order things go in, and of course I always chose wrong. You just got to screw in the cables first, then mount the brackets, and then mount the whole thing to the stanchions that are coming out of the throttle base, out of the Orion 2 base. And then once you got that screwed in, you're good to go. You can put in the little finger lift blocks in the center once that's all done and slide those in there. It took me about 30 minutes. Again, that was with me with really no guidance whatsoever, just kind of messing around. So if you've already got an Orion base, I'm sure you probably already understand the mechanics of it as well. All right, so overall, the Orion 2 is a good-looking piece of kit. It's heavy, it's sturdy, it lights up, it's got a ton of switches. It's got about 8 switches and 5 dials. The dials all have a push function. It's got a couple other buttons scattered around. It's got 2 sliders on the side. Overall, good-looking piece of kit. Like I said, a couple little things that I personally would change. The sliders are a little big, and because they're so close together, they end up kind of TPing together and covering up one of the other dials. I'm not really sure what I'd use the sliders for myself, so I'll probably just leave them center mass. But I think, maybe if they were offset or maybe the handles themselves weren't so long, then that wouldn't be a problem. One thing else I do like about the base itself is it's got these suction cup pads you can screw onto the bottom, which will help it from sliding around. I'm sure you can also bolt it down to the ground. I haven't read the manual for the Orion itself, but it's got what looks like some spots here where you could get some long bolts and plop it in and hardwire it or hard attach it to something. But I think the suction cups was a nice addition for people just use it on their tabletop, and maybe they need to remove it. They don't have a set area where they can play. So good thinking on that one. So again, overall, good stuff on the Orion. Something that I'm not used to. I'm not necessarily complaining about it. I kind of feel like there's stuff all over the place. It's got buttons on the top. It's got buttons on the side, on the bottom. I'm used to more kind of on the base, based on things that I've used in the past. Again, I'm not against it. It's just something that I'm not used to. So it's going to take a little bit of doing for me to get used to kind of reaching around the throttle to the other side for some buttons. Some of it's going to be memory items of where they're at. There's 5 switches and a dial up there, so it's not a huge deal, but again, it's just a little bit different than what I'm used to. All right, so let's talk about the F-15 grips, and I'm going to use the F-15E one here as an example. The F-15E right side, I've got the left side here as well. The left side is basically the same for the two of them. I think the EX one has the vibration motor. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Whereas the E shouldn't have the vibration. They both feel the same. They both feel the same weight, so I'm not really sure if they've just added something in there for weight or if it's just me. Can't tell the difference. For the E, it looks pretty much like what you'd expect from the actual aircraft. It's got the mostly 2 to 3-way switches here. In fact, all of these on the side are click it forward, click it back, click it center, and then it's got a 5-way switch here on the front, as well as the TDC hat. And then for the left grip, you've got the single button, which looks like it's functioning as a 4-way switch, as well as these 2 sort of extra buttons, if you will, on either side, and then the dial for the radar, and then the flare dispense button that's there on the side. It's like a paddle switch. Now again, that's duplicated for both the left, for the EX and the E, so we'll skip over that for the next one. Now for the EX, I like this because it's got a lot more options. One thing I was worried about when I knew this was coming was that the F-15 throttle really doesn't have that many options for buttons, and I like to have options, especially if I'm flying lots of other aircraft. I have different ways I have things mapped, particularly something like the A-10 where there's just a ton of things. This one's got that. So on the side where you just have those momentary switches or those 3-way switches, you've got basically 3 or 4 four-way switches, as well as some dials in the front on the right side. We'll talk about that here in a second. But again, this gives you more options. We've got 3 different four-way switches with a depress, and then as well, like I said, there's 2 dials on the front. One's got a depress and the other does not. Both of them are spring-loaded, and it's one thing that I'm not a fan of. I'll save that here for a second. And then, like I said, the left side is basically the same for the EX. Now we do have the finger lifts with the little block that you can install. You can remove it if you want. Personally, other than it's just kind of a neat feature, I don't see how it affects DCS. If these were switches, if somehow you could use these finger lifts as actual switches in the game, I think that would be phenomenal. I'm not sure how to do it, but this is also not my job. Because otherwise, they're just another thing I have to worry about. They don't have any effect in game. And of course, it comes with another block you can put in on the front of the slide to use for an afterburner detent as well. On the back of the throttle, you do have a toggle which will lock them together. It's not a very comfortable switch. It's metal and it's just kind of a probe, just kind of sticks out. I'd like to see it maybe with some sort of rubber tip or something. It's just not comfortable when you do mess with it. But again, you're not going to mess with it that much. But when we talk about comfort, this is my complaint on this design, and maybe something that they can kind of go back and look at as they refine this, or as they look at different versions. When we talk about the slide, now I'm used to having a slide in the center of my throttle or a pinky dial that I can use for my zoom view. We've got some options on this, but I don't really like any of them. The first dial on the extreme left of the EX is way too sensitive. It's very light to the touch, and it also has a Z-axis to press, and it's very hard to not press it in when you're using that dial. Honestly, I'm not sure that I'm going to use it for anything because it is just so sensitive. I'll have to play with it and figure out what I want to use it for. Then it leaves us to the center dial, which is what I would have liked to have used. However, there's 2 problems with it. One, it's not a slider, and it's not a normal dial. It's a spring-loaded dial. So you push it forward, it springs back to center. You pull it back, it springs back to center. You can, in the software, change it so that it becomes buttons instead of a dial. But then you have a choice within the software of DCS to either have it as a slow zoom button, or you use it as an access, but it's always going to slide back to center. So I don't have a way to quickly zoom in and look at something as I'm used to with my slider on my Virpil, or even as I had on the old Thrustmaster T16 million that had the little dial at the end, which made me think, okay, well then maybe I'll use the dial on the end, which is the radar elevation. The problem with this is it's pretty tight, and so trying to use it with your pinky while also trying to grip the throttle, it's a big grip, it's a little bit hard. I have pretty good sized hands. I have to really stretch my fingers to cover all of this throttle, and trying to then just use my pinky alone to move that dial is kind of difficult. It does work the way that I want. It allows me to zoom in, but because it's so stiff, I don't get the speed, and I have to put a lot of effort into it. On top of that, and this is my real complaint with it, is I could make do with that center dial the way it is, using the slow button if I wanted to. The problem is it's not comfortable. It's spiky. Both of them are just a little bit too spiky, and over time, over a very short period of time, it will leave indentations in your finger. It will leave you uncomfortable. Honestly, playing with it earlier, my finger was a little bit numb using that center dial. So what I would like to see them is put maybe some sort of rubber tip, or just expand the knobs, or what, I don't know what you call these, the grooves, just kind of expand it out and make it a little bit more finger friendly versus what it is, because it does give you grip, and I think that's what the goal was here, but I think we've probably exceeded that goal. We've made it just a little bit too grippy. So when we talk about complaints of the kit, that's really my complaint, is the ability to zoom. I'm a zoomer. I'm constantly zooming in and out, probably enough to make people sick watching me on Twitch, which you can do and you should. But other than that, great piece of kit. It's put together nicely. Most of my complaints are aesthetic, or they're just little things that you could grow to just kind of learn to work around. Again, if you're an Orion 2 owner already, and this F-15 grip, if you're excited about the F-15, if that's going to be one of your main aircraft, then absolutely, I would recommend go with the EX. It gives you those more options. That way you can play around. The F-15E is just designed specifically for that, and it may not give you sort of the options that you want to do other things. Now, when it comes to the vibration, I have figured it out. It took me a little while. It's not just like on by default. you actually have to go into the software, have a login, go into this vibration setting mode, and what it looks like, I haven't played with it enough to kind of figure out the nuance here, but I think it's got some pre-loaded defaults for different aircraft, and then you can create your own, or you can just, edit it or whatever. You can kind of change things around. I've played with it a little bit. I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do, and I think there's just a lot of dials in there to kind of mess around with. So I think this is something I really have to dig into if I wanted to, but I've got it working on the defaults. It's neat. It adds a little bit of vibration kind of depending on what you're doing when you're on the ground. When you're in just kind of straight and level flight, at its default, nothing really happens. You don't feel any vibration, but you will if you fire the gun. If you're coming into land and you're at low speeds, or you're stalling, you'll get some vibration there. So it's definitely something to indicate to you. At the end of the day, it's what you make of it. And like I said, you could probably go in there and change the default settings and have it a little bit more exciting for you. But just out of the box, it's neat. I can see how it would add some value in a dogfight, letting you know that you're getting close to stall speeds and things like that. But just, I kind of expected at straight and level that it would be doing something. Again, probably with the defaults, you could make some adjustments and make that happen. Anyhow, a big thank you to WinWing again for sending me this to let me take a look at it and share that information with you guys. I hope that you learned something. If you do pick this up and you've learned some tips and tricks, hey, put them in the comment section below, share them with the rest of the community, and we can figure out how to make this vibration work. And appreciate you guys watching. We'll talk to you later.